With the big telephone company, for caller ID, call blocking, call forwarding, call waiting, and three-way calling, you can end up paying almost $50 a month for all that. But with Rev Voice, you get all those features for free.
MPs clash in Parliament over the two recently released Cubans. This as the F&M chairman says Mitchell is damaging the country's reputation. A former PLP cabinet minister says the party's convention delay was a bad move. Plus, it's about time for the toughest challenge on the island. We've got those stories and a lot more coming up tonight. I'm Kyle Joaquin, and NB12 starts now. Talking news tonight, Foreign Affairs and Immigration Minister Fred Mitchell suffered a spurious, insidious, and deliberate misinterpretation of his words and endured assaults on his character and integrity. He said as much in the House of Assembly this morning, where he hit back at the F&M, the media, and the attorney of those released Cuban men for comments made in the wake of the men's release from prison and them being labeled as a national security risk. Mitchell said he was shocked government's lawyers offered no resistance to the men's release in court. Prime Minister Perry Christie also addressed the issue, stating that Mitchell acted effectively and properly. He labeled the issue a matter of national security and reiterated that government does not want the Cuban men in the country and has made numerous attempts to send them somewhere else. Dana Smith reports.
Pointing to Fred Smith's dramatic prayer on the steps of the Supreme Court on Monday, Mitchell said Smith's sanity must be questioned and accused him of having a psychological meltdown.
What transpired on television from a noted QC borders on blasphemy and mocking God. It is thoroughly shameful, and he ought to be very careful how he takes the Lord's name in vain. It was embarrassing, and everyone knows that Fred Smith QC has only one God, and that is money.
Mitchell painted Smith as a man who was prone to rash, untrue, false, defamatory, and irresponsible statements, and said that Smith, NASA Guardian Managing Editor Candia Dames, and F&M Chairman Michael Pintard perpetrated mischief in the public domain and misrepresented what he said and who he is for their own gain. He said he pities them all and they must have sad lives.
I believe that anyone who knows my association with these individuals would know that it is not beyond conception or belief that what is published from their pens and what is said from their lips is entirely discreditable, given their strange personal animus toward this MP and their total preoccupation, I would argue infatuation, with a personality to the point where, being ignored, they seek to destroy. I pity them all. They must have sad lives indeed.
Mitchell also suggested documents referenced in The Guardian were stolen from Cabinet, and his position was misinterpreted. A couple of MPs took issue with Mitchell's comments.
But it seems that the member is openly criticizing, ascribing motive to a private individual who does not have a right to defend himself in this place. I just wonder if this is not an abuse of the process.
Our rules are very clear on this, Mr. Speaker. Rule 30, sub-rule 23. Makes it very clear that reference shall not be made in debate to the character or conduct of any person except in his official or public capacity.
And House Speaker Dr. Kendall Major agreed. But Mitchell asked, where else am I to defend myself? Arguing his integrity was assaulted and his character defamed. Mitchell asserted that the release of the two Cuban men came as a shock, and government's position on the men should have been put to the court so the country could know the extraordinary efforts made to protect the population from people who were thought to be a danger.
The instructions from the cabinet and to our lawyers were clear. The men were a national security risk and should not be paroled into the country, and efforts should be made to find a third country to take them. In the meantime, the board was clear. Despite the risk of a threatened lawsuit, the men were to be retained in jail. When the decision was announced, it was quite a shock on my system to find that the lawyers had not offered any resistance whatsoever.
Fort Charlotte MP Dr. Andre Rollins also questioned this lack of resistance by government's attorneys.
Why is it that if these individuals were in fact a threat to national security, why did the Attorney General's office not seek to provide an objection to the acting Chief Justice to ask for their continued detention? That was not asked for. So clearly, the individuals of whom they speak were not deemed by the Attorney General's office to be a threat to national security. That is the issue at hand, and he and his government should speak to it.
Prime Minister Perry Christie also rose to his feet to voice his support of Mitchell. He said the government is caught between a rock and a hard place and has made several efforts to get the men out of the Bahamas. He said he even went so far as to personally write a letter to Cuba's president.
How is it that the Bahamas, with no connection to them, have to be in a position where we have to accept them and have them walk freely around our country and taking responsibility for any manifestation of misbehavior that takes place? That is the position we're in today. And that is what we were trying to avoid at all costs.
Both Christie and Mitchell explained government has spoken with Panamanian officials, representatives from Sweden, and other international authorities about the possibility of taking the men, but to no avail. The men aren't welcomed in the U.S., Mitchell said, because their permanent residency has expired and they had a criminal history. The Cuban government had similar resistance.
The Prime Minister, myself, advised my colleagues that I would make one final effort by making a personal request of the President Raul Castro of Cuba in a letter under my signature to the President, explaining the difficulties of the Bahamas in such a situation, and hoping that the President would take that into consideration, his country being able to more effectively accommodate these persons than our country, and he would help the Bahamas in being able to receive the persons concerned.
Mitchell said government is still awaiting a response to that letter, adding that in the aftermath of their release, U.S. Embassy Chargé d'Affaires Lisa Johnson expressed concern they would try to illegally enter the United States.
The Chargé assured me they were not welcome in the United States, that their border authorities and the headquarters in Washington, D.C. had been notified that the men had been released and were likely to try and smuggle their way back into the U.S., and they should be stopped and sent back. He indicated their suspicion was that they would seek to make their way to one of our northern islands and then smuggle their way across the Gulf Stream, and their naval forces were asked to be on alert for that possibility.
Reporting for NB12, I'm Dana Smith.
Well, Free National Movement Chairman Michael Pintard said the Foreign Affairs and Immigration Minister is single-handedly damaging the reputation of the country. Just after the spat in Parliament this morning, Pintard said it appears Mitchell believes he is untouchable and must be reeled in immediately.
Under Mr. Mitchell's watch, unfortunately, the reputation of this country has come under constant attack. Constant attack. Because of the manner in which he executes his duty.
According to the F&M Chairman Mitchell has his role as Foreign Affairs Minister confused and seems to be focused on his own agenda and bullying the court system. And after responding to Queen's Counsel Fred Smith in Parliament, Pintard said Mitchell clearly doesn't have respect for House of Assembly rules. He also brought up comments Mitchell made last year when he spoke of Bahamar CEO Sarkis Merlian and his legal status in the Bahamas, saying Mitchell gets too personal, which he said is unbecoming of a cabinet minister, especially one who represents the...
This is a dereliction of duty. And Mr. Christie should not permit Mr. Mitchell to continue to be reckless, to show a lack of discipline in speaking loosely about very important matters. This is not the first time.
Pintard said despite the long back and forth in Parliament, in his opinion, Mitchell still hasn't answered the question as to why the two Cuban men should be considered a national security risk. He said it's not a matter of the F&M taking up for foreigners, but just seeking an answer.
If they are a national security risk, we do not want the Bahamian people to be at risk. We wish, one, for the government to let us know, In what way is we at risk? Since the minister does not know where they are or what their status is, or refuses to comment on it. And two, the government should move quickly to present any charges that they may believe is justified.
Pintard added that in attempting to explain his position, Mitchell threw his own colleague, the Attorney General, under the bus.
He has shifted his position from critiquing the court or seeking to ascertain how the court arrived at its conclusion to now blaming the Attorney General's office for, to paraphrase him, what is obviously a dereliction of duty in his mind because they did not follow the instructions that he left in place.
Police need your help in locating this man, 37-year-old Daniel Russell, also known as Fred of 5th Street. He's wanted for questioning in reference to murder. Russell is described as a dark brown male of slim build and stands between 5 foot 8 inches to 5 foot 10 inches in height. If you have any information regarding Russell's whereabouts, you're asked to contact police at 919, your nearest police station, or Crime Stoppers anonymously at 328-TIPS. There is more news after the break, so stay with us.